So I'd like to begin by addressing the case of Ms. Meng Wanzhou. Our legal system is independent from political interference. This is something that we cherish and is an essential part of Canadian democracy. Canadians rightly have faith in our legal system and value the fact that we all live in a rule of law country. Our partners around the world should also be confident in the rule of law in Canada and in the independence and impartiality of our judiciary. Ms. Meng was arrested pursuant to Canada's extradition treaty with the United States. There was no political involvement. The case is before the Canadian courts and is being considered in Canada's judicial system as it ought to be. We have been in regular contact with the Chinese authorities about this case. Our ambassador to China, John McCallum, has spoken to the Chinese government on more than one occasion to provide them with information about the process. I spoke to China's ambassador to Canada today. Ms. Meng has been released on bail, and we will continue to ensure that the Chinese government is kept up to date on the next steps in the judicial process. I'd also like to speak about the detention of a Canadian citizen in China, Mr. Michael Kovrig. I can confirm the reports of his detention. Canada is deeply concerned by the detention of Mr. Kovrig, and Canada has raised the case directly with Chinese officials. We're providing consular assistance to Mr. Kovrig's family and remain very seized of this case. Whenever a Canadian is detained abroad, Canada has a very important duty of care to that Canadian and to the Canadians' families. We will continue to raise Mr. Kovrig's case with Chinese authorities. I am happy to answer your questions.
Okay, so 25 minutes, one question, one follow-up. Katie Simpson, CBC.
My first question to you, Minister Freeland, is are you considering any sort of response or action as a result of what has happened to Mr. Kovrig? Is there any sort of actions the Canadian government is taking in response to that?
We have taken actions in response. We have been in direct and immediate contact with Chinese authorities. We have been in touch with Mr. Kovrig's family. I personally spoke today with a family member of Mr. Kovrig's. I think it's very important for his family to understand how closely Canada is following this case and how important it is. I know that this is something which the Prime Minister is also very personally seized of, and we have raised this case directly with Chinese authorities.
And as a follow-up question, yesterday we just spoke with senior officials who said they're not quite sure whether Donald Trump's comments yesterday would have an impact on what happens with the legal proceedings involving Ms. Meng. But from a political standpoint, after 2 days, you and both the Prime Minister very adamantly said there will be no political interference. You can't and won't get involved. What does that do to your message when Donald Trump says, I might get involved if it will further my interests?
So I listened to the briefing from our senior officials, and I'd like to take this chance to thank them. Thank you, Jeff and David. You guys did a great job. And because they're listening in another room. What's wrong?
They're actually here, but carry on.
Or they're in the room. Oh, hi, they're there. Okay, thank you, Jeff and David. You guys did a great job. Thank you very much. And it was important for our government to give Canadian journalists the opportunity to speak directly with public servants about this, because it is very important for Canadian journalists and through Canadian journalists for Canadians to understand the elements of due process here. You have heard from Canadian officials that it will be up to Ms. Meng's lawyers whether they choose to raise comments in the U.S. As part of their defense of Ms. Meng, and it will then be up to the Canadian judicial process, to Canadian judges, how to weigh the significance of what Ms. Meng's lawyers say. I will also say that Canada and the United States have an extradition treaty, And I think most Canadians would feel it's right for us to have an extradition treaty with our closest trading partner, with our neighbor, with whom we share the world's largest unmilitarized border, with a country which is our ally in NATO and NORAD, and crucially, with a country which, like Canada, also has a highly respected system of the rule of law, a very strong and independent judiciary, as Canada does. You will have seen the statement from the Minister of Justice, in which she points out that if at the end of the legal process, if there were to be a decision by Canadian courts that the legal threshold has been met for an extradition, at that point there is a decision to be taken by Canada's Attorney General as to whether an extradition should proceed or not. The Minister of Justice takes her responsibilities in this regard very seriously, and has today published a very thoughtful statement about that, which I really urge people to read. I will say that it, I think, is quite obvious that it ought to be incumbent on parties seeking an extradition from Canada, recognizing that Canada is a rule of law country, to ensure that any extradition request is about ensuring that justice is done, is about ensuring that the rule of law is respected and is not politicized or used for any other purpose.
Glenn McGregor, CTV.
Minister, your officials spoke about anti-Canadian sentiment they're seeing in China, and apparently this resulted in increased security provided by the Chinese around embassies and consulates. Are you concerned about thousands of other Canadians who are there doing business or traveling in China about their security? And if so, why have you not changed the travel advisory, raising the threat level?
So let me start by speaking about our diplomats. We obviously have a strong duty of care for all our diplomats around the world, and we are constantly evaluating the security of our diplomats and doing everything we can to ensure that our diplomats are safe. That is very much the case when it comes to our diplomats working in China. When it comes to Canadians in China, we also, and Canadians who might choose to travel to China, we are constantly evaluating our travel advisory. We do that for China. We do that for all countries around the world. The current advice urges Canadians to exercise a high degree of caution in China, and that is advice that Canadians should take seriously. That has been the level of our advice for some time. Canadians who are considering travel to China should look at our website. We are constantly evaluating and monitoring the situation.
On the Kovrig case, do you consider the fact that he is technically an employee of your ministry, he's a diplomat, even though he's on leave, does that make his arrest additionally provocative in your mind?
Glenn, we really care about every single Canadian who is detained outside the country. I have to say, as foreign minister, and I really believe the Prime Minister feels this way too, these consular cases are among the issues in our job that we take most closely to heart. So we agonize over these cases because it's our job to do that. Certainly, the fact that Mr. Kovrig is an employee of the department is relevant. And, he is well known by many people in the department. We're very concerned about him. And that is something which I said to his family. That is something which I said to the Chinese ambassador.
Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada.
Madame Freeland, quels sont vos leviers pour être capable de faire libérer M. Kovrig? Parce qu'on regarde ça en ce moment, puis on n'a pas l'impression que vous avez beaucoup d'outils pour faciliter sa libération, d'autant que vous n'avez même pas été capable de le voir encore. Alors, quels sont vos outils, vos leviers possibles pour être capable de le faire libérer?
Je toujours pense que ce n'est pas une bonne idée de faire des prédictions. Et je peux et je veux seulement dire et assurer M. Kovrig et sa famille que le Canada va faire tout ce possible. Nous avons déjà parlé avec les autorités chinoises. Nous avons déjà parlé avec la famille de M. Kovrig. C'est un enjeu très important pour nous et nous allons continuer à travailler pour M. Kovrig comme nous devons le faire et comme nous faisons pour tous les Canadiens dans les situations comme ça.
Quand vous voyez des mesures de représailles comme ça de la part du gouvernement chinois, est-ce que ça vous fait reconsidérer la relation entre le Canada et la Chine dans sa forme actuelle?
Je dois préciser que les autorités chinoises n'ont pas caractérisé la situation avec M. Kovrig comme une réponse de représailles. Et c'est important de préciser ça. En ce qui concerne les relations entre le Canada et la Chine, c'est une relation importante pour le Canada. Et c'est une relation importante pour notre gouvernement. Dans une relation si grande et complexe comme la relation entre le Canada et la Chine, il y a toujours des moments plus difficiles. Mais pour le Canada, c'est important de continuer d'avoir des relations avec la Chine. Et c'est important pour nous de continuer de parler, de travailler avec la Chine. Et c'est la manière dans laquelle ce sera possible au fin d'avoir une résolution des difficultés.
Please go, Meng.
Ms. Freeland, I want to just go back to the travel advisory. I'm sure many of us have talked to friends in the business community who are curtailing travel to China right now, and they're doing so because something has changed in the last week. The External Affairs Travel Advisory, Global Affairs Travel Advisory was last changed in November. And you were saying earlier that you seem to be saying that you think that the travel advisory, as currently written, captures the events such as what has befallen Michael Kovrig. So I wanted to be clear. Are you saying that you already are warning Canadians in the current travel advisory? It may be hard to read, but that they could be abducted arbitrarily, and it's some retribution for the abduction of the arrest of Miss Meng?
Our travel advisory is clear and specific. And it states that Canadians should, and I'm quoting, exercise a high degree of caution in China. That has been the advice for some time. That is advice that Canadians should heed. It's obviously the decision of every Canadian to choose whether to travel to China or not. We do take seriously our travel advisories. We are constantly evaluating them, and Canadians, before traveling anywhere, should look on our website to see what the current travel advisory is.
So what is the likelihood you're going to update the travel advisory in the next day or two?
You know, Steve, that I don't make predictions. Keep looking at our website. That's what Canadians should do any time they travel.
Josh Wingrove, Bloomberg.
Talk about a lot of the relationship with China. Have you spoken with U.S. counterparts about this or made any requests for more information or that they even withdraw this? Because the U.S. request seems to be putting Canada in an impossible position. And President Trump's comments even indicate there could be some kind of gambit here to use the Canadians as a proxy of the trade war that he's mounting with China.
I have spoken with Secretary Pompeo about this situation. I've already commented on the comments we've heard about this from the U.S., and I will just reiterate what the Prime Minister said earlier today, which is what we're responsible for is not the behavior of other countries. What we're responsible is how Canada behaves. Canada is a rule of law country. That is extremely important to our government. I think in the world today, where the rule of law is under threat in some parts of the world, being a rule of law country is more important now than ever. And what I can commit to for Canadians and for our partners around the world is that Canada will very faithfully follow the rule of law.
Your officials also said that Mr. Kovrig was arrested in Beijing, but they do not know his whereabouts now. Canada was not notified for 48 or so hours, and that you still don't know the charges. Canada offered fairly quick access to Ms. Meng, to Chinese authorities. What do you make of that? It seems pretty outrageous that the Chinese would delay notification and still have not told Canada where Mr. Kovrig, where your employee is, what his health status is, and what charges he's facing.
Well, there are sort of two elements to your question, Josh. The first is Canada's treatment of Ms. Meng and our informing of the Chinese authorities of her detention. And as I said, we really believe in being a rule of law country, and it was important for us to promptly inform Chinese authorities of her detention, which we did, and to promptly grant China consular access to Ms. Meng, which we did, and also for her to have full access to due process and to the impartiality and the fairness of the Canadian legal system, which she has had and which she will continue to have. It's our job as Canadians to do that. We have done that, and we're going to continue to do it. When it comes to Mr. Kovrig, as I've said, we're very concerned. And I really want to come back to the reality that this is a Canadian. He is someone who has family, who has people who care about him, you know, including quite a moving piece in the Toronto Star today about him by someone who knows him. As an employee of Global Affairs, many people in the department know him personally. We are very personally concerned about Mr. Kovrig. We have expressed that concern directly to Chinese authorities, and we are in direct personal contact with his family. We are very seized of this issue, and we're going to keep on working on it.
David Lundgren.
Mr. Good afternoon. Reuters understands that another Canadian citizen in China might be in some trouble. What can you tell us about this?
We are aware of a Canadian who got in touch with us because he was being asked questions by Chinese authorities. We have not been able to make contact with him since he let us know about this. We are working very hard to ascertain his whereabouts, and we have also raised this case with the Chinese authorities. We are in touch with his family.
Secondly, you said that countries seeking to have citizens extradited to them should not politicize the situation. To what extent do you consider that President Trump's remarks to us yesterday did in fact politicize this process?
As I said, with regard to remarks that have been made. In the first instance, it will be for Ms. Meng's lawyers to judge whether it is pertinent for them to refer to remarks made by any officials in their defense of her. It will then be up to Canadian judges to determine the relevance of any submissions by Ms. Meng's lawyers. Our Attorney General has issued a very clear statement about how seriously she takes extradition proceedings and where her responsibilities lie. And she has been very clear in that statement that she may be called upon to make a judgment in the event that a Canadian court at the end of the process judges that a legal threshold for extradition has been met. At that point, there will be a judgment for Canada's Attorney General to make. That is a very serious judgment, and she has laid out very carefully and I think very well the situation. I do think that it makes a lot of sense for Canada to have an extradition treaty with the United States. They are our neighbor. We share a vast and non-militarized border with them. We do a lot of trade with them, and we're allies. We are allies in the defense of this great continent in NORAD. We are allies in NATO. And I think that one of the reasons that Canadians have confidence in our relationship with the United States, including in our extradition treaty with the United States, is that the United States, like Canada, has a very strong, highly respected legal system, a very strong, highly respected independent judiciary. I do also think that it is incumbent upon parties making an extradition request to be sure that that extradition request is about ensuring that justice is done, is about respecting the rule of law, and our extradition partners should not seek to politicize the extradition process or use it for ends other than the pursuit of justice and following the rule of law.
Marie Vestel, Le Devoir.
Oui, bonjour Mme Freeland.
Bonjour.
Ce que vous venez de nous annoncer un peu à l'improviste, qui aurait peut-être pu être dit dans votre déclaration d'ouverture, sur cette deuxième personne qui vous a contacté en Chine, pouvez-vous nous dire un peu qu'est-ce qui semble s'être passé? Est-ce que c'est un employé? Est-ce que c'est un touriste? Est-ce que c'est une personne d'affaires? Est-ce que...
Je ne veux pas dire plus à ce moment-là à cause de... c'est une situation personnelle, c'est une situation peut-être délicate et je veux respecter cet individuel et sa famille.
Okay, but is this person detained or you just lost sight of them? And then my follow-up, in regards to the fact that Mr. Kovrig is a former diplomat or diplomat on leave, you said that part of the equation was relevant in answer to my colleague's question. Can you elaborate on what you mean by it's relevant? Perhaps there's a symbol to arresting someone like that?
So as to the second individual, I was precise and complete in my answer to David, which is to say that we were in touch with a person who was being asked some questions by Chinese authorities, and we have not, since that moment, been able to ascertain the whereabouts of that person We're working hard to find out where that person is, and we're in touch with that person's family, with this Canadian.
They don't know where he is either, right?
Pouvez-vous juste répondre sur les diplomates? You said it was relevant.
Oui. Non,
It's relevant.
je vais. Yeah. As I said, when it comes to Mr. Kovrig, I really want to come back to the point that for me, for the Prime Minister, really the issue that probably touches our heart the most, the thing that keeps you up at night, that you wake up in the middle of the night worrying about, is Canadian consular cases. It is agonizing when a Canadian is detained outside Canada. We take this very personally, and we work very hard for every Canadian in this kind of difficult situation. That is why with Mr. Kovrig, we've been in touch with the Chinese authorities, why I spoke with the ambassador today about it, why I spoke with his family. It's important for them to know we are personally concerned, we are personally engaged. The fact that Mr. Kovrig is an employee of my department means a lot of us know him. And that adds another layer to the concern. But I want, and I've, in some of the reporting that I've read about him, as I mentioned about Tonda's paper, reporters who know him have shared that with readers. But I do want to say also, we care and we work hard and we fight hard for every Canadian who is detained abroad.
I'm told that it's the last question, and since I said I was going to seize it, I only have 3 other questioners. If we take one question each from them, then that's mine and a follow-up gone. So can I take just those 3, one question each, not a follow-up? Okay?
That's okay.
Deal?
That's a deal.
You're all welcome. Okay, I've got Paul Vieira, Paula Newton, and Epoch Times. So Vieira, one question.
What is Canada prepared to do if Mr. Kovrig does not get consular access on a timely fashion?
Again, Paul, I have found it prudent and have made it my practice not to venture into hypothetical waters, and I'm going to stick to that today. But let me again repeat and reiterate that we have been clear with Chinese authorities that we are very concerned about Mr. Kovrig's detention. We've been clear with his family that we are concerned as well. This is a very important issue for Canada, and we're pursuing it and we'll continue to pursue it.
Paula Newton, CNN.
Mr. Freeland, thanks again for doing this. You spoke with Secretary Pompeo. Wanted to know if you could elaborate on that conversation. Chinese authorities accused the U.S. and Canada of this being a politicization of this issue. Donald Trump then went ahead and proved their point. He said it was political and that he could do it. So what specifically did you say to Secretary Pompeo, and if there was anything you asked him to do specifically?
I spoke to Secretary Pompeo about this some days ago, and what I said to him was that Canada, I spoke to him several days ago after the detention of Ms. Meng, and I said to him that Canada, of course, honors its treaty commitments, that Ms. Meng's treatment was entirely up to this point, up to the point when I spoke to him, and it remains the case, had been entirely a matter of due process, and that she would be treated fairly and impartially in Canadian courts. That's what I said to him.
And Epoch Times.
You said you're very concerned about this diplomat's situation. Is Canada ready to make a public demand for his release?
We have already publicly raised the issue. That is what I am doing right now. So, yes, we are very concerned. We have shared that concern with China. We have shared that concern with Mr. Kovrig's family. And in the first instance, what we are seeking is consular access.
But are you asking for him to be released?
I think that the first step is to get consular access to Mr. Kovrig to understand the situation better.
Okay. Thanks, Minister. That's all the time we have.
Okay?
Thank you for doing that.
Not at all.